John Feeley here. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Panama and Marine helicopter pilot. He joins us from Madrid. John, what signal does this deployment of that huge U.S. aircraft carrier send diplomatically and militarily?
I think, Terry, quite frankly, it just sends more of the same. The simple fact is that from a tactical military perspective, the United States has more than enough aerial projection power and cruise missile, Tomahawk missile power offshore to do exactly what we think the Trump administration wants to do, which is to provoke a regime collapse, provoke fear inside of Venezuela, and perhaps land a few missiles inside of Venezuela, an escalation we have not seen them do yet, all under the very thin, frankly, pretext of a counter-narcotics struggle. Sending the Ford is literally nothing more than sending a louder noisemaker unless and until you actually get to pulling a trigger, which I personally hope never happens.
Now, many countries are concerned about what's happening there. Countries, including the UK and Colombia, have stopped sharing Caribbean-related intelligence with the United States. Is that likely, John, to have any practical implications for the U.S.?
Unfortunately, Terry, no, because this is not a a counter-narcotics operation. Look, the UK, France, the Dutch have collaborated with the United States for decades out of something called the Joint Interagency Task Force. We know how to collaboratively with our allies track suspected narcotics, small craft. We know how to interdict them legally under the rule of law. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State for the United States, said it very clearly. We did it legally. It didn't work, in our opinion. So now we're just going to go ahead and blow these craft out of the water. So the fact is, the United States, which did for decades benefit from that kind of active collaboration of European and Caribbean and South American allies, really doesn't care very much. This particular administration doesn't care very much about collaboration. What it cares about is projecting its unquestionably superior power. The issue, as always, is, are they willing to pull the trigger? Are they willing to go to another foreign war, which paradoxically Donald Trump ran on a platform of saying he was not going to get the United States into another foreign war like Iraq or Afghanistan.
And yet, John, we're seeing a military buildup on both sides, the U.S. increasing its presence and Venezuela mobilizing troops. From your experience as a diplomat and a military man, how real is the risk of escalation here?
That's the million-dollar question, and I don't pretend to know the mind of Donald Trump better than anybody else, Terry. What I can tell you is the following. For decades, especially after 1947 and the creation of the National Security Council, there were institutional processes. We had Democrat and Republican presidents. We had different administrations with different propensities, but there always were practical and very, very hands-on information-based fora in which these issues were discussed. Unfortunately, in the Trump administration, these really don't exist anymore. And you have a very small group of individuals who are, frankly, improvisational and amateurish, who run things according to Signalgate, as we saw earlier with the Iran nuclear bombings. The men and women who are on the front lines of those military weapons are absolutely the best in the world. The sad fact is they're being commanded by people who I believe live in a video game reality.
Now, Moscow and Caracas have been deepening ties in several areas, arms sales, energy, political support. How significant is Russia's involvement in this conflict, John?
The fact is Russia has, compared to the past, actually backed off. It is undeniable, Terry, that the SA-300 and other shoulder-fired missiles are Russian provided. It is undeniable that there is a diplomatic relationship, mostly based on sort of nice sounding declarations and photo ops. But Vladimir Putin has got much bigger fish to fry closer to home in the Ukraine. And I don't think you're going to see anything that has a practical implication should this escalation continue. I don't really believe that the United States and the uniformed professionals of the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force are terribly worried about seeing Russian Sukhoi bombers or other types of involvement. I think
Right.
what you'll get is rhetorical statements, but not much more.
Well, the Trump administration has been increasing pressure on several countries in Latin America, not just Venezuela, applying sanctions, trade restrictions, and so forth. What's it hoping to achieve with this strategy, John?
You know, I think it's been very clear since the 20th of January when the president was sworn in for a second time, and he spoke to everybody's surprise about Greenland and the Panama Canal. I believe, and I think many other analysts share this view, that Donald Trump is a legitimate U.S. president, but who has very clearly autocratic tendencies. And he sees geopolitics kind of like the way a mafia divvies up a city, kind of the way the mafia divvied up my hometown of New York in the 1970s and 80s, in spheres of influence. And so I think what he's trying to do here is to show very clearly that in the Americas, in the Western Hemisphere, it is the Trump administration and Donald Trump in particular who is the top dog. And so that's why you're seeing all of these frankly, rather foolish and way over the top demonstrations of force. Nobody needed to be convinced in Latin America that the United States is militarily the most powerful nation in the neighborhood. But the show of it is meant to gratify a domestic base that votes for Donald Trump, that has been convinced that, unfortunately, it's not true, but has been convinced that Venezuelans are somehow our public enemy number one. And now the new sheriff in town, Donald Trump, is going to go and put them right back in their place and drive their leader away. I personally am skeptical. I don't believe it's going to work.
John, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. That was former U.S. Ambassador to Panama and Marine helicopter pilot John Feeley.